These are the Camponotus haberi, and for them I built this incredibly beautiful home out of this glass case. You'll see how I did that and if the ants actually made themselves at home in this video. Enjoy! We're starting with a vivarium measuring 30 x 30 x 30 centimeters, which I got from Antcube. The difference from their regular arenas is that the holes are higher up, so you don't cover them with substrate. We'll plug these for the next steps with the stoppers they came with. By the way, that's not so easy to do with one hand, and I only pushed through because my ego just couldn't handle failing. Once I admitted defeat, I used two hands and I could move on to the drainage layer. I used expanded clay for this. This stuff is there to soak up all the excess water so the substrate doesn't get too wet and the plants don't start to rot from too much moisture. This way, moisture can also be released over time and everybody's happy. I'll link all the exact products I'm using in the description, of course. There are other options, but expanded clay just looked best to me. Next, I grabbed a separation fleece and cut it neatly to size. For this, I just placed the glass box on the fleece and lightly marked the dimensions with a pen. The fleece helps ensure that the soil and the critters in the vivarium don't mix with the drainage layer as much as possible, keeping them separated from the excess moisture. After putting it in the glass box, I made a few adjustments so the fleece wouldn't wrinkle too much and create gaps in the layer. It doesn't have to be perfect, since the incoming soil will press a lot of it flat anyway, but it should still look tidy. Then, however, I noticed I hadn't used enough expanded clay. The side drainage plugs weren't covered yet, which would mean that if I got waterlogged, the water would have to drain from the soil itself. That would make quite a mess if it even worked at all. So I added some more expanded clay until it was level with the plugs, and then I could relax and place the fleece on top. Before we get to the soil though, I had to take care of a hardscape design. This involves the items that define the landscape in the vivarium, so you have to factor them in when considering the amount of soil. I picked out this gorgeous piece of wood here. It had some really cool shapes that are definitely interesting. To match, I choose another piece of wood that's a bit smaller as a complement, but I'll show you in a moment why it goes so well with the other one. Next, I grabbed this medium-sized stone. It's like a real classic stone, if you know what I mean. Its color and shape are perfect for fitting it into the vivarium. With the second stone here, you're probably wondering, and I'm too. But I thought the color was so cool and I just figured, okay, why not? I want to set up the whole vivarium naturally, of course, but a little bit of sparkle has never hurt anyone, and if it really doesn't fit, I can always take it out. For the plants, I did a ton of research and managed to settle for 3 for now. The first is Pyrosia lanceolata, also known as lance leaf tongue fern. This one should cope well with the climate and the vivarium and not get too big. You can easily trim any leaves that get too long, and seeing the ants on them will definitely be cool. Secondly, I choose an earth bromeliad, more precisely Cryptanthus bivitatus. Cryptanthus bivitatus. Cryptanthus bivitatus. This one doesn't get too wide, not particularly large, handles the climate, and above all, it simply looks magnificent. The slight pink edges and the soft green combined with its star shape will be a real eye-catcher in the vivarium. Thirdly, there's another looker, Tillandsia ionantha. This one has the unusual characteristics of being an air plant. That means it doesn't need soil and can simply be placed in the setup. Of course, it also needs a tiny bit of water and generally right climate, but it's a good third counterpart to the other two plants. And because no vivarium is complete without moss, there was, of course, also Java moss, Vesicularia dubiana, for those necessary green accents. I'm a bit worried here that it won't take root well in the vivarium, but that wouldn't be a huge loss since we have other inhabitants who will go for any plant leftovers. More on that later. Once I had everything together, I could start with the first mock-ups. And here you can also see how I picked out the pieces of wood. They fit together like 2 Lego bricks and can perfectly form the back. I deliberately decided against the full back wall so I could see in from all sides. And with these wood alternatives, I think I found a perfect middle ground. Our ants should also feel comfortable with wood, so that's a happy little coincidence. It was trickier with the plants. They had limited space and the bromeliad worked really well in the foreground as a visual counterweight without blocking the view of other things. Our air plant also found a home pretty quickly. Thanks to the shape of the wood, it could be positioned like a crown on the little plateau where it could grow above everything. And as if it were made for it, the lance-leaf tongue fern also found its corner. There, it can add a nice touch, its leaves can show off without being overpowering, and it helps establish a kind of slope in the vivarium, giving it a good balance. Actually, the trickiest part was positioning the stones. I tried to think about how stones would lie naturally, but no luck. My imagination kind of gives up there. Generally, all of this was a first for me, so I was still a bit unsure. I wasn't afraid of making mistakes, but of course I wanted to get it right. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the placement. The blue stone especially has something interesting coming up that I'll show you later. That's why it placed so far forward. I didn't want to take the moss out of its damp packaging yet. I placed it spontaneously once the soil is in the vivarium. And this is what the whole thing looks like from above and from the side. Now we're getting to almost the most important step, the soil. In this case, I used terrarium soil specifically made for this. It's free of substances that can be in regular potting soil, but aren't good for our little creatures. The soil also holds moisture well, partly because of its humus content, but you have to be careful there, because humus isn't necessarily good for all living things. I'll get back to that later. First, I'm mixing some activated charcoal into the soil. This helps prevent mold, which can easily pop up in moist vivariums, and keep the soil clean. I'm kind of eyeballing this, just making sure it's well distributed, but not too much. Before the mixed soil went into the vivarium, I added some distilled water to get it nicely damp. I was hoping this would make any creatures I add later feel as comfortable as possible, giving the plants a great environment and make the soil easier to dig in, because it's not just loose but sticks together a bit. It's really important to use distilled water or osmosis water, not regular tap water. That way you don't get things like lime build up in the vivarium, which would just accumulate over time. As you can see, I started carefully with a spray bottle and then used larger amounts once I got a better feel for it. With the soil all prepped, it finally went into the vivarium, and I tried my best not to leave any gaps in the fleece. The fill height was simply set just below the side plugs, and to finish up, I pressed the soil down lightly a few times to make it more compact. This is to stop overly loose soil from causing the ants' tunnels and chambers to collapse. Now I could finally get on with the final setup of the vivarium. The wood was pretty easy to place and stood up great on its own. The first plant was also super easy to position, and I made sure to plant it deep enough so the leaves had a few centimeters of space from the top edge. Once that was done, the second piece of wood could be placed, and you could already see how well it all came together. When placing our air plant, I experimented a bit but ended up sticking with the crown idea. I used the base of the earth bromeliad like a stamp to mark the exact spot where I needed to dig, and I could plant that easily too. I also made sure the plants had good contact with the new soil so they could spread their roots right away. Then another quick check to see if I should bring the grey stone into the front, but nope, it's staying further back. And with a little digging, the blue glitter stone was also buried in place. Now I just needed to spread out the little piles of earth and fix up small things, and the vivarium was almost ready. You could argue that it still looks a bit bare. In particular, one could add small twigs, stones, leaves, and whatever else you might find on the ground. There are also ground covering plants, but it was important to me to be able to watch the ants properly at first. They'll rearrange everything to their liking anyway, and you can always add more. Taking things out is a lot more work and trickier, so step by step. And it also gives us a chance to ask you, what else would you like to add? Let me know in the comments. I gave everything, especially the plants, a little refreshing shower and admired my hardy work with satisfaction. Doesn't it look lovely? It's not the most mind-blowing vivarium in the world, but it's my vivarium. My first one. I made it all by myself, with love. You can tell I'm pretty proud of it, no doubt. And I think the ants will like it too, because they are what this is all really about, an all-around good thing. But before we get to the ants, the real stars of this video, we have a few guests here. What we are looking at here are tropical springtails. These little guys are part of a so-called cleanup crew. They eat mold, rotting stuff, leftover food, decaying leaves, and so on, and thus help keeping the vivarium in good shape. If conditions are good, they multiply quickly, which is why I don't want to add too many at first. But our ants will be too big to eat them, so the numbers will probably increase soon. And so they don't have to do all the work themselves, there are other helpers too. Also part of the cleanup crew are the white isopods. These small isopods have similar eating habits to the springtails and also like moist soil. That's why we dampened all the soil. But apparently they can also have issues if the soil is too rich in humus, so it's important to give them alternatives. But overall, together with the springtails, they ensure an optimal vivarium where they all live together in harmony. That's what I'm most excited about, and it was already awesome to see them exploring the vivarium and spreading out everywhere. The next day, the vivarium already looked totally different. I put it on a heating mat to get the right temperatures for the ants, and the glass was covered with thousands upon thousands of tiny droplets. I thought this looked really beautiful, and the way the contents of the vivarium were silhouetted through the glass was like something from a dream. But that wasn't the only surprise. We also have a little surprise guest here. A small snail must have snuck into the vivarium and made the long trek up the lid, and I've decided to keep it for now. If the ants eat it, so be it. And if it starts harming the plants, I can always remove it. The drainage layer with expanded clay also started doing its job, and I kept admiring the view. But we couldn't let the beauty distract us. For our next steps, we needed a clear view, and I wiped the droplets of the inside of the vivarium, bit by bit. Luckily, this was super easy and didn't leave any streaks, since thanks to evaporation, it was also distilled water. And after a few minutes, we had the vivarium in front of us just as we'd left it. I was still captivated by the sight. The humidity was still very high, but especially for the mosses and plants, that wasn't a bad thing at first. And right at the top, raining over everything, you could see our air plant had already started to open up and soak in the moisture. The bromeliad also continued to show off its full glory. These were the perfect conditions to get to the main event. Without further ado, and with a warm welcome, may I present Camponotus hawaii, the newest flatmates in our ant room. These ant species immediately catches your eye with its striped bodies and is absolutely gorgeous. They come from Taiwan, and the workers grow to be 5 to 12 millimeters large. They have a pretty relaxed development rate, so they are perfect for a smaller vivarium like the one we have here. The ants had huddled protectively around the queen and the small pile of brood and were on high alert, ready to react to anything that might happen. The workers were also clearly not happy but had briefly confined them for transport. They had been in a small heated arena until the vivarium was ready and definitely wanted their freedom back. Little did they know what kind of surprise we had in store for them. Carefully, I placed the ants into the vivarium, nicely on the blue stone for the best contrast for filming and watching their reaction. I removed the cotton and was ready for anything. Right away, you could tell the ants noticed something had changed, and their antennae danced in the breeze of new smells. Cautiously and hesitantly, they ventured to the edge to report back to the rest of the colony. With careful steps, one brave ant dared to leave the opening and explore the immediate area. The queen also seemed to be agitated now. I watched as the first scout made wider and wider circles around the colony and the vivarium, careful not to stray too far from her sisters. A second ant ventured to the opening, but quickly ran back to the colony, which appeared worried. But the lone scout seemed unfazed and shared her information with the workers. The colony was clearly interested, but still seemed a bit caught off guard by the new situation. Suddenly, there were new possibilities here, and the spot in the light was very exposed. A bit disoriented, the larvae and eggs were rearranged. Another ant dared to go exploring. Each time, everything was carefully checked with antennae, and all the information was absorbed. We know the ants are safe, but the ants don't know that. Then it suddenly hit me that I hadn't put on my escape barrier yet, and the lid was still open. Oops! Quick, put it on before we have to round up the whole colony. Meanwhile, the colony was still active, and out of nowhere, the queen herself ventured forward. She too wanted to know what was out there. Countless smells flooded her sensors until she finally decided it wasn't the right time. But one scout was clearly looking for something. She checked out several small holes and bumps, and suddenly there was the queen again. Was she actually going to leave a nest tube now? Had a worker found something she wanted to see? She seemed quite undecided, like someone about to bungee jump and stay in the same position for a good while. And I mean a long while. I wonder what's going through her head. Her decisions are vital for the colony's survival. One wrong move and it's over for her and all the workers, so she can take all the time she needs. But even now, it wasn't meant to be, and she let a worker feed her. The process is called trophallaxis, where food from the worker's social stomach is passed on to others. Not all, but many ant species have a social stomach, and it's always fascinating to watch. And do you see what's happening here? Very subtle. Look, here on the side. An ant had brought a small stone and was obviously looking for a place to put it. Other ants were still exploring the area, and I don't want to keep this phenomenal sight of the ant on our pink-green bromeliad from you. They were still searching and exploring. It looked to me like they were looking for an option to move the colony. After all, the colony still had plenty of workers, and the brood also needed space and had to get out of the light as quick as possible. So I soaked up the sight of the ants. The workers had started to shape the world around them, so we wouldn't be able to see them like this much for long. But I also noticed how they were cleaning themselves and cleaning their antennae. This was probably due to the rise in humidity and the water settling everywhere, including on the ants. This will calm down once the main part of the water has evaporated. Nevertheless, I swapped the upper mesh with the side one to create a sort of chimney effect. Warm air rises to the top and pulls fresh air from the side. This improves ventilation. While doing that, I noticed a small fly. It must have come in with the plants too, and I didn't know what species it is. Do any of you know what it's called and if it's something to worry about? I also use the short break to apply some escape barrier with paraffin oil. I usually use talcum powder to keep the ants in, but with this high humidity, it would probably get too damp and clumpy. Besides, I think the clear look of paraffin oil is better for the Vivarium appearance. Again and again, I saw springtails bustling in the moss, and I wondered what they were thinking. But I had already expected them to like the moss with all its moisture. But back to the worker carrying the stone. Do you see that? It wasn't just one stone. Do you see that huge clump she's pulling into the tube? Could it be that the ants aren't moving out after all? I was completely surprised but also fascinated. It seemed as if the ants had suddenly changed their plans for the colony and were not going to dig themselves in. That was a bit of a surprise, and I just had time to set up my timeless gear and seize the unique opportunity to film the workers' construction. Every option is carefully checked and tested, bit by bit. The entrance and exit are carefully sealed. I could seriously watch this all day, but since I can't actually watch it all day, I let the timelapse record and tried not to disturb the ants. In the timelapse, everything was even more impressive. The workers worked tirelessly, and you could wonderfully see how the access to the tube was closed and expanded. Amazing footage. And then the colony was gone. Wait, gone? 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 Yes, gone. Vanished. Poof. Look at it. It's there. Then it's gone. I looked just as shocked as you probably do now. I did not see that coming. First, it looked like they were moving out, then they were looking like they're staying, and then in the home stretch, when everything was ready, they suddenly move out. You can't make this stuff up. But where were they now? I couldn't find them anywhere in the Vivarium. I looked everywhere and couldn't find any sign of anything. No mounds of piled up earth or even a single worker out and about. Now, the only thing left was to check the recordings. So I fired up the laptop, looked at the footage, and look who we have here. A brave queen followed by a worker with a larvae in their mandibles. And probably the last time we'll see the queen. And if we play the time-lapse at actual speed, we can even see where the queen disappeared to. Somewhere back there, near the wood, the colony must have found a new home. I specifically chose those pieces of wood so they could set up a small colony in the little nooks, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't spot anything. The greenery was too dense and the angle too tight. I searched and searched, but not even the tiniest sign of an ant. Absolutely crazy how they vanished, and I was truly gobsmacked. I kept trying to find them, but I had to accept it. So far, I had only kept ant colonies where I had a more or less clear view. But now, the queen was gone. The Vivarium was their home now, and we achieved what we set out to do. The colony feels comfortable, and so we feel for them. It's a shame we can't see them now, but they will grow and continue to surprise us.